Good morning from the United States. Good afternoon, wherever in the world you are, where it's afternoon, and good evening from Germany. Hello, everybody. Good to have you back on your screen and our screens and in our virtual studio. And it is fantastic to have Dr. Michael Wu again with us. Hello, Michael, and a warm welcome.
Thank you.
Michael, we were so enthusiastic last time that there was so much opportunity of checking out what is useful, available, what is to be thought of in artificial intelligence and all its probabilities, that we fully embrace the opportunity that we do a question and answer session, such as with the fantastic movie I recalled, all the questions you never dared to ask on AI, and we are going for that one. So
bring it on.
I would encourage our audience to participate in our Facebook channels and in LinkedIn with their questions they would like to get asked and answered. And for those which are not yet in your fan community and do know, let's say, that you are the man for these type of things and an expert with pros, could you give us a bit on your background, your career, and what you're doing right now, aside of being with us?
Well, I'm not too big with the introduction, but I would just say that like doing machine learning and AI is something that I've been always doing. I've been doing that since my graduate study at UC Berkeley. I mean, even undergraduate, I was actually an applied mathematics major and physics major and neurobiology major in undergraduate. And then in my PhD, I basically applied machine learning to model the visual processing inside the human brain. And then I've gone into the industry and basically apply those same methods in machine learning to, I would say, social media and behavior data. And then now I'm applying that to, I would say, more in the pricing and revenue management domain.
Well, it is amazing that just on time, some folks in the software community announced another approach after Microsoft did some announcement. Now Salesforce was so kind, and on their Trailblazer CX or Trailblazer X show, they announced what we as analysts did know a little before, that they combined Einstein and ChatGPT. Together with some other useful thoughts and made possible options. It is a general question I would like to place into the round, as I was very fond of the idea that an open source tool, only Office called, had already an integration of ChatGPT in a large scale, very user-friendly, and where you could show the task, write me a text, give me some advice, write some code, and gave the user a friendly framework in guidance. Saying this and finding this as one of the announcements which will come in the Microsoft arena on separate service parts, separate sales parts, in the CRM arena, the offering from Salesforce announced today seems to be a further step forward. In general, how useful can this stuff be?
What do you mean by that?
It's kind of a broad question.
Yeah, where to start?
That is naturally one of my attitudes, such as it's like a surprise pack. Yeah, you open a box like Pandora's box, and there is good and there is evil. How much good and supportive opportunities are coming with the utilization, the smart, intelligent use of artificial intelligence is coming around the corner.
Well, I think definitely there's a lot of benefit, right? I mean, that is not to say that there's no danger, right? But there's, in terms of the benefit, I would say, yeah, I mean, we can be a lot more productive. We can be a lot of, I would say, drudgery, like, a lot of work, a lot of tasks in our work today are not necessarily the tasks that we love to do or get excited, doing every day, right? A few, right? Just to name, like, expense report, right? Who love doing that, right? Or I just have to do a few of these, because I have to, I just did quite a few travels, earlier this year, and there's just a lot of things that we would rather not do. And I think these things can be automated, and that will actually free up our time to do things that we like to do. And they actually probably are more meaningful and more important and more strategic in some way, right? I mean, if they're not, then, one of the reasons that these things are not so, so kind of boring, some kind of repetitive tasks are there. We need to do them, but to make the business run, right? But then, they're not necessarily very important for the business, or I would say strategic for the business, right? So they just need to be done. Somebody needs to do them, right? So those are things
have to add up at the end.
Sorry?
The numbers have to add up at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the accountants get angry. But
or the tax auditors, if you put in the wrong numbers, or the machine gave you some advice which was not to his liking, such as there is an attitude in Germany which very famous is like a big sport to pay at the least or at the lowest amount of tax as possible. Tax prevention and payment too much taxes. It's a very common sport and hobby. More serious.
Hooking a little into our last episode with you, you defined or described 4 categories of AI and AI usage. Where does a generative AI fit in there?
Yeah. So, I mean, generative AI is, well, it depends on how you use it, right? So the last time when we talk about the 4 categories of AI, perceptive AI, cognitive AI, that's one category, right? And then there's also the internet AI and personalization AI, that's the second category. And then we also have the autonomous AI, and we also have the decision AI and business AI. That's kind of the 4th category, right? So, so these are, I would say, use case driven classification of AI, what they're used for, right? How do we use them? What is the AI actually doing, right? The way. But then generative AI is actually the mechanism. What kind of model did they use? It's a kind of classification that's different from. You could actually use generative AI can be in many one of those cases, right? I could, for example, use it right now. ChatGPT, that use case is a essentially a perceptual cognitive AI, right? It's mimicking the language, speech understanding, capability of human, right? So that's a perceptual cognitive type of use case, right? You could certainly use generative AI in the, for example, business design domain to do, for example, machine-aided kind of drug discovery or something like that, right? So that's a decision AI, business AI, right? So generative AI is just a different way of classifying these type of AI, but it's based on the type of model. What they use is generative model, right? So I mean, the GPT in ChatGPT, stands for generative, right? So GPT stands for generative pre-trained transformer, right? Transformer is just a kind of neural network architecture. And pre-trained is the fact that they've been, trained already, so you don't have to train them from scratch, right? So they train with large corpus of documents, so they understand language, they understand actually all the different kind of language in the world, right? And also, a lot of information that's available publicly on the web. And so that's pre-training. And then the fact that it's generative in nature means that, you give it an input and it generates a whole bunch more new text, right? So DALL-E is a generative AI because it's, it's actually comes from a kind of model called generative adversarial network. So generative, again, is generative. You can actually create things, create images in that case for generative adversarial network. And the adversarial meaning that the type of learning mechanism that they use is adversarial learning. And then there's again, a neural network architecture, right? So these are kind of, this classification of generative AI is based on the type of model that's actually used, right? So but it can be used in, I would say probably, creatively in all four of these category that we talked about last time, because they're use case driven classification, not model based driven classification.
How do you see the competition on the market? And I will jump in on Laurie's question as well,
because it fits.
as there is a lot of offerings from Microsoft, from Salesforce on assistants, Alexa, Google Assistant, Apple Siri, and they are in a certain kind of competition. And they're offering a lot of convenience, guidance, and positive things. On the other hand, as I'm a big fan of privacy and GDPR, I have to place the question from Laurie as well as my own concerns, and I mean it honestly as concerns. If there is no guidance, no rules, no framework, there is a lot of open space to do also, coming back to the Pandora box, to some evil or at least negative things. What's your take on that? And we can read if it is, because there is a lot of text.
Basically, what are the guardrails? That's the
So let me answer the first question first, right? So all these other, I would say, chatbots, essentially, right? Alexa, Google Assistant, Siri, or even ChatGPT. They're essentially chatbots, right? So it's these conversational agents, or conversational AI, if you want to call them that. And now Microsoft, with its partnership with OpenAI, right, have again roll out another their version as well, right? And certainly they are in some way competing, right? But they're tied to their platform to some way, right? So each one of them had their own kind of back end platform that they tie into, and they can leverage the information. So because to make those chatbot personal and smart, right? So otherwise, a chatbot is just a chatbot. It just talks to you. It just responds. I mean, it doesn't know anything about you. So with Siri, Google Assistant, right, and now with Microsoft and certainly Alexa, now you can actually tie it back to the data that they have about you to understand you and to answer your question in a more personalized way, right? And not just a generic type of answer. So I think that there will be some competition because they are, essentially similar type of offering, right? Some kind of, in terms of function, right? It's a way for humans to communicate and talk to machine using our own language, right? It doesn't have to be English, it could be German, could be French, could be any other language, right? But using the language that we're familiar with, human language, right? Not like with code, not with like, Python or SQL or something like that, right? So that's a big advantage. So in that respect, yes, they will compete to somewhat, right? But it's really more of an extension of the competition between those platforms, because those platforms, the data that they have about their customer or their user is what allow these chatbot to talk to you in a more personal way, right? So in terms of the guardrail, right? So
I'll bring that up again.
guardrail, yes. So guardrail is definitely necessary, right? But I do think that there is a need to push things out and test it in the real world, right? Because it's one of those things that I feel like there need to be a dialogue between the
Yeah.
legislation or legislature body and the scientific community that actually develop these tools, right? And
Yeah.
I think right now there's not enough of that. People are just raising concern, right, in the public, and uh, the the legislators don't know anything better. All they can do is reflect what the public has raised, right? You have bias power. Yes, I'm not saying the science community is not saying that there's no bias, and they're not saying that bias is not a problem. They acknowledge that, but then the law, the legal, the legislature is saying that no, there's bias, so we should have to do something about it. But they don't know what to do, right? What can you do? I mean, do you stop this completely? That's not reasonable, right? That prevents, I mean, but if you, every time I talk to these, I would say people who raise quite like these kind of questions, right? What do you do with bias, and and then every big company that I talk to today have some kind of AI ethics committee or something like that, right? Or responsible AI committee.
Genau.
Yeah, they have that, but then a lot of the rules that they put up are not necessarily make any sense, because the people who make the rules are not data scientists. They don't.
If I would like to take on that point, as you came directly to the ethical question, and I would like to answer that question from Laurie. What body is taking care of this? In Germany, we do have an ethics commission, and that ethics commission is directly reporting and advising the ruling government in law suggestions, in critical reflection, and it is a body which is concerning of scientists, lawyers, and a lot of forward-looking, smart people. And there was, for instance, a female professor, a young lady who had a lot of concerns, especially placing challenges on the questions with autonomous driving in Germany. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
There was a lot of research. What is able? What are the machines capable? What are the cars capable? And what is the technology capable of? But they still cannot sort all ethical questions. And there is help needed and guidance needed. And the ethical commission could be one part of guidance, but there must be more. Any ideas on that?
Well, I don't have the answer to that's I have to put that out first, right? I mean, there need to be.
You are here to answer.
Yeah. So that's a big shoe to fill, So I certainly don't have all the answers, especially with ethics. But yeah, I think there need to be ethicists, right? There definitely need to be ethicists, but today I think the general public, the vocal kind of people in the society are playing that role, and I think that's fine. I'm not sure if it need to be a profession called ethicist. It might be. I think in the future there might be very well be ethicists out there, and I think a lot of companies probably a lot of company that's doing research in this area probably have someone like that, right? And I'm playing a little bit of that role myself as well, right? To make sure that we are using these type of technology in a responsible way, right? I did that before in my previous company, when gamification was really hot, right? So gamification is actually a very powerful tool as well, right? It influences people's behavior, right? When you're changing people's behavior, how they behave, how they act in the real world, there are real consequences, right? And you have to use that in a responsible way, right? So similarly, I would say AI is also a very powerful tool, right? I mean, it can definitely change people's behavior and understanding and the decision that they potentially could make, right? And has real consequences as well, right? So there need to be somebody who look at this and I would say, put some guidance, right? I mean, I think that to prevent the development of science is probably too heavy-handed, right? And I think what I suggest is always like there need to be regular dialogue so that we surface, these questions to the science community, right? And so science can actually be more active about addressing some of these questions, right? Right now, yeah, we hear problems come up, right? But nobody's saying that this is what you should focus on, right? So they don't know what to focus on, but everybody raising all these different questions up there. There's too many, right? I would say anytime anything new come up, there's always going to be concern. There's always going to be problem, right? So we do need to put it out there and test it and let people raise those questions, right? Right now, we know that ChatGPT, in fact, it seems like it's really smart, but it's actually not that smart. In fact, a lot of times it's actually wrong. A lot of the questions that they answer are completely wrong. You could prompt it in a certain way and ask it a question in a certain way and make them create something out of fabrication. This is what we call a hallucination. And just completely created out of its own imagination without any facts, any backup or anything, right? So that's people find out about this, right? And people raise concern, right? But then you make this thing so authoritative, so people think it's real, right? But hey, is that ChatGPT's problem, right? I don't think it's ChatGPT's problem, right? We want to believe it, right? But we are the one who have some responsibility into what we take as reality as well, right? I think there is some responsibility for making ChatGPT to respond in such a firm, authoritative way, right? But we are also responsible too, right? We need to be smart enough and fact check and don't just think, oh, I asked a question and you give me an answer and it sounds good, so I'm going to take it, right, as real, right? Yeah. That's just, I would say, lazy man's method, right? And kind of put the blame on somebody else, right? Not my fault, right? It's your fault, right? So,
it's the machine's fault.
That ties into John's comment here. So what do you think is it that companies that use this type of tools can do? For example, clean data. What else can be done? And you also said what data scientists or what science can do.
Yeah. So I talk about this bias issue a lot. I have written like kind of four different articles on this already. If you Google for it, Michael Wu.
Give us the link, then we'll publish them.
Bias. You probably find it, right? But I'll give you the link anyway. But I do think that striving to have clean, unbiased data is a lost cause. Data will always have some bias. Even completely unbiased things, like a coin flip, right? If you flip a fair coin, right, 100 times, do you think it will come out exactly 50% head and 50% tail?
Of course not. There are observer effects.
Exactly. There are statistical randomness, right? Sometimes you may get 48 versus 52. But those are considered acceptable range of kind of statistical error, right? But as you're kind of, if you flip it 1,000,000 times, right, it better be pretty close to 50-50, right? That's the thing, right? So the fact that we have finite training sample or training data, right, and trying to strive for 100% kind of clean, unbiased data is a lost cause. I don't think it's achievable, and I don't think it's reasonable, and I don't think it's actually good use of time to ensure that they are kind of totally unbiased, right? But what I think is really useful is that think about where do those data actually come from, right? Those data actually come from us. We are the one that's actually biased, right? Because we as humans, we make decisions that are biased. That's why those data are biased, and they are used to train the AI, and that's why the AI is biased. So the bias in AI is actually a reflection of the fact that we humans make biased choices and decisions, right? We don't realize it because we don't make them as fast. It's just like flipping a few coin flip, right? If I flip a perfectly fair coin 10 times, right? Even if I flip I have a biased coin, right? Completely, maybe one side is kind of maybe heavier, right? If I flip it 10 times, you're not going to be able to tell reliably whether it's biased, right? If it's slightly biased, if it's a really, 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 really biased, like every time it's head, right, you might be able to tell, but you're not going to be able to tell, right? So what can we do, right? The best way to deal with this thing is actually ensure that human make better decisions in the future. And a lot of that actually comes from the fact that you can actually use gamification or things like that, right? And feedback to inform the human what decisions they have made in the past, right? I mean, I in one of the articles that I've written, I use HR as an example because that's tend to be a very sensitive area to bias and discrimination.
Mhm.
So let's say some company X, right? They've been hiring people, and the hiring manager is saying that I'm not biased against any gender or race or anything like that, right? I'm just hiring who's most capable. But if you actually look at the data, if you look at us in the last month, you may not actually realize there's any bias, right? Bias is inherently, I would say, a collective kind of thing, just like a coin, right? If you flip it 10 times or 100 times, you may not see the bias. If you flip 1,000, 10,000, a million times, you might be seeing the bias, right? You need a lot of data to show that bias, right? So this is the thing where analytics can be helpful, right? You could feed back to the human and say, you know what? Yeah, you may not think you're biased, but over the past 10 years, you've been hiring, for example, 20% more male than female or something like that, right? Maybe you would actually change, who to hire as your next candidate, right? You may still pick a male because still the best qualified, but you may make you think twice, right? Maybe I should, look at more female candidate or invite more female candidate to interview with us so that we'll give them more chances, right? To see, right? So that's the thing, right? We humans have to learn to make more unbiased decisions. So the data that we generate to train this AI becomes less biased over time, rather than just cleaning the data, right? We need to change. It's not the data that needs to change because we generate the data.
Right.
So,
You can't fix bias without first observing it.
Yeah.
mhm.
So, with that in mind, I'm wondering, are we striking the right balance between pure AI research, applied AI research, and the sort of commercialization that we're seeing in industry?
Well, I think one thing that ChatGPT does really well is it's more of an awareness. I would say it reach a critical mass of awareness, right? It in terms of technology, or I would say, it's actually not new. Like ChatGPT's success really is a bit, somewhat accidental to some extent, right? I would say that it. Okay, I have some conjecture. I mean, I believe that it really get the verbosity right. It gets the verbosity,
Hi, Lori.
yeah, really, really well. Okay, and if this verbosity is really great in this chat type of medium, right? I mean, think about this. If you have your Siri or your Google Assistant or Alexa, if those devices, those speakers, as verbose as ChatGPT, it would drive you crazy. Right? You would stop, right? But somehow this chat medium, right, is actually able to, because we don't have to read it all, we scan it through very quickly, right? It's okay to be that verbose, right? So it's getting that verbosity right for this medium, and it's actually people like that, right? People don't get annoyed by it, right? As opposed to, but the technology actually exists. They can actually perfectly make Google Assistant, Siri, or Alexa as verbose as ChatGPT. You can do that. I mean, it's in fact the transformer architecture were invented, I would say probably 10 years now by Google, right? And they just scale. I mean, what ChatGPT did that's really amazing is that they scale the model up and train it with a much bigger kind of set of documents, right? And there was there's human in the loop for curation and learning and all that. That's the great thing that they did. That's their biggest contribution. But in terms of the model or the technology, it's not really that innovative, right? But somehow it got the public's awareness, and I think that's a good thing, right? Because now people have to kind of pay attention to it, right? Everybody's paying attention, which is actually a good thing, right? Because that's how we move forward. In terms of balance, right? I mean, balance is always a hard kind of kind of achieve, right? I mean, it's where is the right balance, and it's different for different people. And I would not, I'm not going to try to make a judgment on whether we are at the right balance or not. I would just say that the market will figure itself out, and I think that like people who are voicing these concerns, the ethicists, right, will voice the concerns, and hopefully these will trickle back into the scientific community and drive more research and development into addressing those concerns of the public. Right? And I think so having this, I would say, right now, it's the feedback to the scientific community is a bit kind of indirect, where we'll kind of hear in the news, we hear it, from, but there's no kind of, I would say, like I said, a kind of regulatory body, right? That at least in the U.S., I'm not aware, maybe. So Ralph, you say in Germany there is, right? There's this, right? So maybe we do need something like that, right? To kind of give us a little bit more direction, right? And like I said, the important thing is having that dialogue in some kind of regular cadence, right? So that people do know, people do understand what's important and try to address them, right? Rather than just wait until it will probably eventually get fixed, after, but it may be too long. Maybe a lot of damage has been made already, right? And we wouldn't have to suffer through those damages otherwise.
Before coming back to another question of John's, what do you think can companies do or enterprises do to be more wise in choosing their data sources that is used for training, in order to keep bias at least under control? I think we all agree we can't get rid of it. It's culture. It's based on culture.
Yeah, I think that's so. Certainly, there's some, I would say, data cleaning or the kind of pre-processing, or right. But then you're selecting the data, right? So you may actually introduce other bias that you're not aware of, right? Yeah. So anything that you do to the data could potentially bias it in some other way that you may get rid of the bias that you want to get rid of, but you may actually introduce other biases too, right? So it's a two-edged sword, right? So I think like I said, the best thing is essentially, try to curate, I would say, understand the bias in your data first, right? So that's number one, to understand, and you could use that with analytics, right? As I said, these biases are very apparent when you actually look at large enough sample, right? When you look at small sample, you're not quite sure. Is that really bias? Is it just statistical fluctuation, right? That you not worry about, right? And so those are things that we need to do first, right? Understand the bias that exists, right? And then we can think about a two-pronged approach. Right? One is try to mitigate those, right? Try to clean those up or resample, subsample, or resample to try to but in the meantime, right, feedback to human users so that we make better decisions that's less biased, so that we correct ourselves in the future. So we become better humans in the future, rather than just delegating the problem to data scientists or machines or something like that, right? So
that would be good.
Okay, perfect. John made an interesting comment earlier. So this was about the bias discussion. And now what is immediately pressing on this planet is actually, oh God, my job is in danger. So there's an individual component and a highly personal component that this type of tools have. How can this be? Is this, how valid first is this concern in your eyes, and second,
I would say
how
that,
can it be mitigated?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that it's a bit exaggerated. I think there are some jobs that might be, I would say, displaced, but not because AI is replacing human, but because people all of a sudden become more productive, right? I may need 10 designer before, or 10 kind of writer, but now I only need 5, right? Because I know a lot of it, they could write better, write faster, and it's not really. But I think this technology will always displace some job in the short term, but they generate more job in the long term. Think about a car, right? I mean, before you have a car, right? People need to, I don't know, drive horses and horse trailers and stuff like that. So, you know, having a vehicle, automobile, or something like it displaces a lot of jobs. But then you also create a lot of that. It creates taxi drivers and all this stuff like that that may not exist because there's no car, there's no taxi, there's no notion of taxi, right? So same thing as ChatGPT. ChatGPT already created some new job that you may not know of. They call them prompt engineer. Right now, you know, how do you talk to ChatGPT in the most effective way to get the answer that you want? That becomes an engineering task. They created this job because there's this new technology that requires that, right? So it in the short term,
GPT operator. Yeah.
sure, yeah. So right now in the, you know, I would say science or technical community, they refer to this as prompt engineer, right? Because you need to prompt the ChatGPT with some context, right? So that because ChatGPT, you can't actually, you know, right, at least right now, OpenAI is not allowing you to kind of update the model parameters of this large language model, right? They have to train it at their kind of schedule because they're big and, you know, and so the retraining actually do take quite a lot of effort and engineering. Like I said, their biggest contribution is the fact that they are able to train it with such a large corpus, right? So anyway, yeah. So it does create a lot of job, a lot of new interesting startup as well, right? So it does create a lot of new job, but in the short term, yeah, they may display some jobs as well, right? But if you really ask yourself, you know, overall, right? I mean, technology in general, this over time, right? If you look at it in the grand scheme of things, right? Over time, they do create more jobs than it displays, right? And the job that displays are usually jobs that are probably not very motivating, not very interesting, and kind of boring jobs that people don't get excited doing, right? And so I often, in many of my talks, I often talk about the fact that, you know, a human actually have been doing way too many mundane, repetitive jobs that should have been done by machine a long time ago. Okay, and that's actually, you know, a side effect of the industrial revolution. Right, we basically want human to behave like, you know, industrial machines, right? To, you know, create I don't know, if you're building something, right, create something that's perfectly, you know, quality, obey all the rules, and with no exception, right? And everything had to be exactly the same, right? I mean, it's that's just not what humans do, right? I mean, machine could do that really well, right? I mean, machine, you could create if you ask it to make I don't know, my mug here, right? It's a very big mug here, right? Machine could do a perfect job making exactly every one of them exactly the same, right? But humans, if you make them with hands or something like that, if you with a hammer, it's not going to be perfect every time, right? It's going to be a little bit different, and that's the beauty of it.
Will
Yeah.
have its challenges. For instance, as you placed your mark, and so it came to my mind, and I wanted to ask, therefore I raised my hand, such as could business processes been done with the help of AI, or what do you think about the automated persona generator, which is state of the art and helping to understand our audience, customers, and users? What do you think about those two?
Yeah, I don't know about this particular use case. I mean, maybe we could discuss it and you have to describe a little more. But I do think that business process can be redesigned to be more human centric, right? I think, for example, right, I don't know, I'm picking on finance and expense because I just have to go through a lot of pain creating finance, you know, expense reports, right? And that's kind of, you know, I feel like, you know, hey, you know, these, yeah, we've been trained to, you know, follow these rules, no exception, right? Basically, that's like machine could do that, right? If you're able to program it, then the machine could actually make absolutely no exception. But if you actually, but I think in the future, humans, I mean, there will be a human counterpart to the machine, right? They're the ones who's the machines are, these are, and they're the one who actually are going to be more human and say, okay, I understand. He's actually, you know, he make this exception because he was, you know, the request came in last minute, so I'm going to allow it. basically humans are there to be human, right? To essentially infuse more, I would say, human-centric kind of quality into these business processes, right? I mean, rather than just be a cold, heartless business processes that just as it is, right? Right now, I think sometimes we could escalate this and say, hey, can you be understandable here, right? It's treated as these are treated as exception, right? But in the future, all those kind of norm, the 90% that comply, those will probably be handled by a machine, and a human actually will focus on those, those exceptions, right, and deal with things that are, not the norm, right? So,
but there should, in general, be a human available to have oversight of the AI.
Sure,
Right.
exactly. I mean, there will probably always need to be some human oversight or kind of working with the AI, right? You may not need as many humans as before, like I said, right? Because now with AI, you can be more productive and more efficient and use a resource more effectively, right? But there will probably be always some human working with the AI, right? And to handle, I would say, exceptions. There always will be some exception. Frankly, until the world has no more problems, I don't think there's a place that AI can completely replace human, right? So if you think that there is a world where there can be absolutely no problem at all, then sure, maybe AI will exist and replace all of our job and our task in the future. But frankly, I don't think that's going to exist. There will always be every product that you design, there always some newer problem will come up, a new solution need to be created, right? Imagine this, right? I mean, if it's a new problem, right, AI is not going to know how to solve it because you've never seen it before, right? It has to learn from human how we solve it, and then it can maybe, if you learn from a human to solve this problem a few times, then maybe you can automate that, and next time you see the problem, you will know how to solve that. But so we become like a teacher, right? Teach the machine how to deal with these outlier cases, right? That may not happen very frequently, but when it happens, we can actually focus our time to addressing those problems. Right? Right now, we're just trying to do it as fast as we can, right? Trying to get rid of it, and then essentially we've been treated like a machine, right? But now, we can actually focus on addressing the root cause and really what the problem is, and let machine take care of the efficiency part, right? Because they are indeed a lot more efficient than we are, right? But we are much better at problem solving, critical thinking than they do.
So far, yeah.
I think it will be for a long time. So yeah.
Getting a little back and this long time, actually on reflecting on the long time. So where do you see that now that we are talking about generative AI for nearly the whole time now, where do you see its limits?
Where do I see its limit?
Yeah.
Well, I think that its limit is it's actually fairly, I would say, open, right? The fact that it's generative, right? You can actually generate design or things that are actually may not exist before, I mean, that we would probably never think of, right? Or so I think the limit is actually pretty high, right? I mean, but there are things that generative AI cannot do, because the fact that for example, these type of GPT, right? Generative pre-trained, right? The fact that it is pre-trained, meaning that it doesn't know anything that's now and beyond, right? It doesn't know anything that's current and the future, right? But there's a whole, I would say, other classes of model. For example, the one that we do, like approach, we are focused on the now and the future, right? We're focusing on forecasting demand and pricing getting at the optimal price now, right? So all these are kind of this completely different algorithm, right? So they're focused on the now and the future, right? So these things, they could very well work together, I think, in that respect. Yeah, so I would say that generative AI, is typically they're very, very large model, and they need to be pre-trained. Otherwise, it's just intractable, right? So the fact that they are pre-trained, meaning that they're actually leveraging on data that existed already, right? That they are already out there, right? So that's what they are pre-trained with, right? So they have this very broad knowledge of what already exists, what's already out there. but it doesn't know the now and the future, right? So
Coming
that's
to
one kind of limitation, right, in general. But there's a lot more.
the learning was my buzzword or my trigger for sustainability in the aspect of energy consumption.
Mhm.
The training, there are figures around how much energy it does take to train the system.
Yes.
But after it is trained, I was missing any data on the general energy consumption of requests, like you know how much a search is energy consuming, but you do not know how much an artificial intelligence search is consuming. And one of my thoughts were that aside of ethical guidance, we should have a look, not running in that direction blindedly in a one-way street and say, yeah, cool, and forget that there are more data centers needed, more hardware needed to
Yeah.
do that job.
Yes. So this is actually an interesting discussion, right? So ever since ChatGPT was released, I've been paying from multiple sources about interesting use cases, and can this be used by can ChatGPT help me solve this case? And I say yes, it can help you solve a lot of cases, but is that really the best use of ChatGPT? This is the question I often ask back to those people, because yes, it can solve it, but do you know how much it costs you to solve it? I think this actually relates to the sustainability question, right? Because right now it's actually it's actually generated a lot of, I would say, it uses a lot of electricity, generate a lot of heat, a lot of things, and it is actually costly, and I would say these companies, right, OpenAI or they're passing these costs back to the user, right? So the economics of it will probably help you actually balance the problem a little bit, right? If people know, right now it doesn't cost us anything to ask a question with ChatGPT, right? So someone is subsidizing this, right? But at some point that will become not sustainable. They will actually, somebody will have to pay, for this, right? When that comes, people will think twice. When it's eating into their wallet, they will think twice, right? So they will know that, okay, maybe, and that the fact that it is actually 1,000 times more electricity used to run these questions or run call API to get an answer, right? Will become more apparent. Right now, it seems like free to us, but it's not free, right? So yeah. So very often when I come to answer this question of what is the best use of ChatGPT, think about, like, we should use it where ChatGPT is probably the only thing that could solve this type of problem, and not use it where some other method can be used to solve it, right? I mean, very often I would say I will hear a use case and I say, well, you could solve that with just simple decision trees or train a neural network to solve it. Why do you need? I mean, you could use ChatGPT to solve it, but that's just it wouldn't help you at the long run, because when you actually productize this, you will have to pay for the cost of making that call, and you will realize that oh shoot moment, right? That, like, oh, I didn't realize that was that expensive, right? And by then it may be too late. If you actually built that, right, it will be you actually spend a lot of human cycle engineering time to build that product and didn't realize how much you have to charge a customer. And the charge, believe it or not, when you actually are factoring the real cost of that, maybe people are not willing to pay for it. Right now it seems free, but it's not free, right? So the best use case tend to be one that are what we call leverage, the generative nature of it.
Okay.
The fact that it is not pre-scriptable or pre-programmable, right? If you could pre-program it, just program it, right? And it's very, very cheap to run a program that you can program, right? Even a program that actually learn, right? You could use traditional machine learning, a simple model, decision tree, or neural network, right? Those are not, I would say, as expensive as this large language model, it's ChatGPT, right? You can actually learn and do all the things that you wanted to do, right? And you wouldn't be as expensive. right? ChatGPT made it seem easy, and it's make this seem free, but it's actually not, right? And right now, it hasn't actually come into the minds of most people because people
Yeah.
using it as if they were free, but it's not free. No, there's no free lunch out there. So
I just thought on the
I think concerns about both energy usage and internet bandwidth have got to be
Sure.
a deal
Yeah.
there. Any further thoughts on that? Other than
Yeah,
the fact that
it
it's
does
not
actually consume a lot of bandwidth because very often these type of processing they're sharded out as a kind of distributed computing for machines, and they do need to get synced up, right? Otherwise, the answer would be kind of completely messed up, So that bandwidth, the inter kind of machine communication, that bandwidth is absolutely critical as well, right? So electricity, bandwidth, everything is more costly, right? So like I said, right, all that is kind of completely, I would say, opaque to the end user today, right now, because we feel that, hey, we could just ask a question, right? Or what is the difference between asking ChatGPT and asking a search, right? Typing a query for a search engine, right? The fact is that like somebody have to pay the bill, right? It may be you who's paying the bill. So in the future, sure. Yeah.
It's a good amendment or amendment by
Somebody have
Jahres,
to
so
pay it.
that's
Yeah.
concentrate
Whether-
on where the value is.
Yeah. Concentrate on where, you are really leveraging the generative nature of this type of AI, right? And not ask yourself, is this pre-programmable, prescriptable, right? Or is it need to be really generated on the fly, kind of, and that you cannot kind of pre-program it. For example, like a chatbot is something that's very hard to program. I cannot tell it what to respond to every single question that's out there. It's impossible, right? You can't tell DALL-E to generate an image because every query that comes in is different. It's reacting and generating that on the fly, right? So those are good use cases, right? Where if you actually try to say, okay, I'm just trying to make it automate something, can it translate my language, my natural language to something else, right? Yeah, and some of those can be good use cases if it's really hard to kind of prescribe or pre-program. But a lot of those that I heard are actually not so, right? You can actually easily kind of pre-program those in some other way and run them much more cheaply and generate a lot less carbon footprint and use a lot less electricity and so on. Right?
There was let's change tech a little, because this is quite interesting. It's the usual in quotes scenario, attacker versus defender. So about enterprise security, is AI more an asset? Well, for whom is AI more of an asset, the attacker or the offender?
Well, I would say that tools are kind of agnostic of good or evil, right? I mean, AI it's a tool, right? I mean, it's the human that's the problem, right? It depends on which hand does it falls into, right? And there are so I would say that if it falls in the hand of bad actors, it's more damaging. If it falls in the hand of a good actor, sure, right? I mean, tools are kind of agnostic. I would say like it's like a gun could be used for good, can be used for bad, right? I mean, it's and I don't want to say it's more of an asset because they're equal, right? I mean, it's kind of, if you have that tool, right, you could use it equally for good as well as for evil, right? And I think that's that the general kind of idea, the consensus was that like if you give it to enough people, most people in the society, in general, are good people, right? There's usually a few bad apples, so that so there's more good use cases out there because most people are generally good, right? And I like to believe that. And if that's proven wrong, then then I would retract this statement here. So, but in general, if that's the case, then I would say that probably there's a lot more good can be generated, right? If good people.
I only know the negative cause, that voice recognition system could be cheated, and that we had some cases here in Germany where police is warning for such
Mhm.
imitated voices and that they try to cheat people. On the other side, one of the preparatory things we ping-ponged in our prep sheet was that it could help in fraud prevention because AI is smart and can find patterns. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So AI can definitely, be a better, I would say, tool to spot these type of kind of, I would say, signatures, right? Signal or signatures in
Mhm.
these generative AI. So I believe that Intel already have chips that is able to detect generated images, what images are actually generated and what are not. So there are, I think it's coming, right? Like I said, these AI is gonna displace a lot of job, but it will also create a lot more new job, right? So who's gonna, design those chip that detects like these what we call deep fakes, right? Or whether it's a voice deep fake or image deep fake or video deep fake, right?
Yeah.
Like people capturing video that are realistic and people can't really tell with our human eyes whether they're real or not, right? So
Ralph had a question.
yeah.
As we never let him speak out, he chose to put it into the text.
So I would say that I'm not
It's a
so
fake.
sure.
It's a fake.
I'm not so sure Einstein actually uses the ChatGPT from OpenAI. I'm not sure if that's the same.
Just have a look into the video from
They
Salesforce,
do.
their promo.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
they did this as a sample. Look, we can easily create code, and
Yeah.
I was just wondering, as the boss in old times went around like a visionary missionary and said, "I control my company by my iPhone."
Mhm.
Well, one could guess that he sometimes loses control by only using his iPhone. So, how much do I rely on low code, no code? And John has also made a comment already on that, um, such as it needs to be controlled, as there is a challenge in transparency, what is put into place and put into productive work. Yeah.
Yeah. So one very simple example is that, like, a lot of these things, when you write code, right? Because human languages are, I would say, inherently imprecise, right? I mean, when you say,
Mhm.
when you describe something, right? I want the code to do something, right? You don't consider every single outlier, the edge cases, and all that stuff. We just don't, right? Our language didn't say. I mean, so let me just give you an example, right? If I can certainly ask ChatGPT to generate a sequel for me, right? For example, say, given a schema, right? You have to know the schema first, right? And if you give it a schema in the prompt, and then say now generate a sequel that, for example, tell me what's my biggest revenue lift, from what's my total revenue lift, right? So I'll say like, what's my total revenue lift from all my customers, in the kind of Eastern European region last quarter, something like that, right? And you actually generate a sequel that actually would give you the answer, right? And now the thing is that if you actually execute that sequel against the database, it will give you an answer. It was, for example, like $175 million, something like that, right? But how do you know it's right? You didn't write the code, right? You didn't write the code. I mean, so the thing is that, like, if you give you an aggregated answer, how would you know it's actually correct, right? So we kind of take it for granted this is correct, right? But it may be completely wrong, right? Maybe it's like, so it have a notion of, like, for example, when I asked them to summarize, get the total revenue lift for all my customers in the Eastern European region, it have some notion of what Eastern European region mean, which may not be the same as yours, right? It may include like country that you don't think you will consider that, maybe Asia or something, or Middle East or something like that, right? Like, so you have to be able to kind of, step through and explain to you how you get this answer. Your Eastern European consists of these countries, and your customers are in these, and then you may actually say, oh no, actually that customer, I don't consider this human, please exclude that. And you will actually, refine the SQL, right? So it's more of this dialogue and iterative process to get the answer you want, rather than if you take it as true, from the first shot, very likely you will make errors that you don't know, right? Because like human language, as I said, is inherently imprecise. Trying to treat it as a precise language like a code or mathematical formulas is actually dangerous. We don't think about all the outliers. When we ask a question, right? And we don't know actually what goes into that answer, right? If you give you an aggregated answer, the total revenue lift is blah, right? You have no way of knowing that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, as we passed the hour, it's time for our usual closing question, the famous last words.
Okay.
What do you think is the near to midterm future of AI? What's lying ahead?
I think it's going to be bright and promising. I think it's definitely an exciting time to be alive. Being a chief AI strategist, I might be a little biased when I say that because
That bias again.
yeah, there you go, right? There you go. I mean, we are biased, and basically, really the one way that we need to blame are ourselves. We should not blame computer or machines or data scientists for their bias. It's really us that's actually biased. We are the one who make those decisions, and those data actually come from the decision that we make. So yeah, so I would say that if there's any last word, right? I mean, yeah, I think AI, with the help of AI, we can actually learn to be better human ourselves.
That's
Klasse.
just perfect. That's just perfect. Let's stop it right here. It can't get any better.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Michael.
So, thanks, Michael. That's been absolutely great. Absolutely great. And as you have seen from John, we are not the only ones to think this. So this. So
Thank you. Yeah,
thanks for this.
yeah, pleasure.
Thanks for John to John and Laurie for their highly interesting commenting, which we unluckily couldn't all bring up on screen.
There's always next time.
There's a next time. I'm quite sure of that.
Sure. Yeah,
Having said that,
let's find something in the future, and yeah, and I'm happy to do it in a more interactive way, and yeah.
We'll just have an AMA for you.
yeah. Okay, then let's go backstage. Thanks to everybody who was in and still is. See you next time.